One of the biggest compensation claims in UK legal history has been launched on behalf of hundreds of thousands of British businesses. Having been allegedly overcharged on MasterCard and Visa card transactions, lawyers acting for the businesses will seek to recoup billions of pounds worth of fees. Joining me now to talk us through the complexities of it all is lawyer Jeremy Robinson. Jeremy, thank you for coming in.
Great to be here, Neil.
In relatively simple terms, what has happened here?
Well, the problem is actually, at its core, quite simple. Businesses up and down the country have been paying too much to their banks in charges just for the right to accept payment by debit or credit card. And this is all because MasterCard and Visa have a rule that requires the banks to charge each other fees for accepting these cards. And the banks just pass it on to the businesses. And the music stops there. And it's completely unnecessary. And even though the percentage amounts added to each transaction are actually really, really small, we're talking 0.2, 0.3% here, it adds up very, very quickly. So even if you take, for example, a relatively small convenience store, mid-sized grocery store, that might have a turnover, let's say, of £3 million a year. On an annual basis, we've calculated, assuming everybody is paying by card, that's probably £7,500 of unnecessary excess fees. Now, we're able to bring our case from 6 years back. So 6 years of those fees, that's £45,000.
For just that one local,
for that one
mid-sized
local store. And if we're talking hundreds of thousands.
When you say unnecessary, at what point does unnecessary become unlawful? I mean, has a crime been committed here by making these unnecessary charges?
Well, it's not exactly a crime. What we're talking about here is anti-competitive behaviour. So in a normal competitive world, the banks would decide between themselves, well, they would decide each for themselves what fees they would charge to businesses for having their business. But what we've got here is that most of the bank charges which businesses pay every month are set from elsewhere. So not by a competitive process between the banks, but by virtue of their membership of the MasterCard and Visa schemes. And that's anti-competitive. The banks themselves should individually decide their own conduct, but they have this rule.
Well, it sounds like a kind of knowing negligence. The banks understand this because it's in their interests to recoup this kind of profit per transaction. And the fact that the little business that's just accepting payment doesn't know. There's a kind of knowing, they're too silly to realise this is happening, so we'll just let them pick up the tab.
Well, I think you're right. I think most businesses are probably unaware that this is actually happening. Whether it be your local barber shop, your local 7-Eleven, corner shop, they have their charges for having their card machines, and that's all they know.
So they're having their pockets picked?
Yes, in a way.
What is the big number? You know, you talk about one, you used the example of a single shop. What is the big number that has been unnecessarily charged to hundreds of thousands of businesses?
It's a very, very big... We are talking well into the billions as the total size of the claim, and we could be talking 7.5, 10 billion plus interest for the period of the claim. So it's a truly massive claim.
And will it work? I mean, will all of these companies get back every sou of unnecessary charge that was levelled against them?
Well, the way in which we're doing it, we're bringing this as a class action, as a funded class action.
What is a funded class action?
So we have an investor called Benchmark Advisors. They have invested in our claim. And what that means is that the vast majority of businesses, if we win, the vast majority of businesses will be allocated a sum from a pot, and they will get 100% of that sum back. You've asked me whether or not we will win. We are very confident we're going to win. And the reason we're confident is that there have been a number of cases against MasterCard and Visa that have been taken at the European Commission level and have been taken in the courts in the UK. And in the courts in the UK, that's been on behalf of the very, very large supermarkets, which ultimately led to settlements, high-value settlements. And we are adopting exactly the same principles, exactly the same economic theory, legal theory behind this, and we are applying it to the entire economy because it's not good enough that only the very biggest companies with the very deepest pockets have the ability to pursue the corporate giants like this.
Julie, you know what it says to me? It's no wonder the banks want everyone to make transactions with plastic cards, and then the next iteration of that is going to be, central bank digital currencies. Because when all of that is taken away out of sight, so that we're invited for the sake of convenience to not know what's happening, this is what you get.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a point, not two other pence here and there. But no wonder the banks want this kind of transaction going on, because they can recoup billions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two things. It's one that we have become much more of a cashless society, especially since COVID, where we've all had to use our cards more. So this must have gone huge during that period. But also a lot of, as you say, businesses don't know that these little pennies here and there will add up massively. And it's really interesting that you're also looking at those smaller businesses. I think that's great, because your little post office person or your convenience store owner who... that £7,000 or £8,000 perhaps a year or more is quite life-changing to them. So I think it's brilliant that we're not just looking at the big businesses here, we're looking at the smaller people too.
No wonder they don't want us using cash as well, is what I would say. Because a straightforward cash transaction, none of this is even possible. I mean, no wonder the banks would rather we weren't using cash.
Well, of course, there are other complexities around the use of cash versus the use of cards, and obviously our case is not about encouraging people to use one form of payment or another. Our case is that the businesses are accepting the cards are a fact, and the fees that they have to pay to their banks because of MasterCard and Visa's conduct are too high, and we want to get that back.
So if your case is successful, will the rules be changed? Will the system be corrected?
We would like our case to be part of a broader campaign by which one day we hope these fees are abolished entirely. We have spoken to some officials in government about this. This is what we'd like to see, but we don't have control over the legislation. We are not there drafting the legislation. What we can try and do is put some pounds back in the pockets of these businesses, and so they can get something back after the really difficult time on the high street over the last few years.
Billions and billions of pounds hanging in the balance.
Exactly.
Jeremy Robinson, lawyer, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'll want an update in due course.